Lonely billionaire in a wheelchair sat alone until a single mom whispered, "Let's fake a date." Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Today's story is titled, Lonely Billionaire in a Wheelchair Sat Alone Until a Single Mom Whispered, Let's Fake a Date. It is lever under Dan's. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows of the grand wedding hall. The music swelled, laughter spilled from every table, and golden lights shimmered on crystal glasses. Yet near the edge of the ballroom, away from the crowd, sat a man who did not join the joy. His name was Ethan Ward, a 35-year-old billionaire known for his empire in renewable energy and for the tragedy that had left him in a wheelchair 2 years ago. His tailored navy suit was perfect, but his eyes carried that quiet distance of someone who had once run miles through life and was now confined to four wheels. A champagne flute rested untouched beside him. Every so often, guests would glance his way, offer a polite nod, then turn back to the dance floor. He told himself he preferred the silence, that pity was worse than loneliness. Still, as the bride and groom shared their first dance, the sound of applause felt like thunder in his chest. The lights blurred. For a second, he thought about leaving early again. But before he could move, a soft voice came from behind. "Hey," it said gently, "would you mind pretending to be my date for a minute?" Ethan turned, surprised. Standing before him was a woman in a pale blue dress, rain still glistening in her brown hair. She held a half-empty glass of lemonade, her other hand clutching a small purse that had clearly seen better days. Her smile was awkward, uncertain. "I promise it will only take a second," she added, her voice a mix of nerves and kindness. "My ex just walked in with his new fiancée, and I really need to look like I have moved on." For a moment, Ethan simply blinked. No one had spoken to him like that in months, straightforward, unfiltered, almost funny. He studied her face. Not polished, not fake. Real. "You want me to, what, pretend to be your date?" "Yes." Her eyes flicked toward the crowd. "Just smile once, that is all I ask." He let out a low breath that might have been a laugh. "You picked the man in the wheelchair for this?" Her lips curved into a soft grin. "Actually, I picked the only man here who looks lonelier than I feel." That disarmed him completely. Something warm cracked open inside his chest, a feeling he had almost forgotten existed. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Then have a seat. Let us make them jealous." She sat, exhaling a breath of relief. And for the first time that night, Ethan saw her clearly. Maya Collins, single mother of a 7-year-old boy, had been invited by a cousin she barely spoke to. She looked out of place, yet somehow she fit perfectly in the moment beside him. "So, Ethan," she said, catching the name from the card at his table, "how long have we been together?" He smirked. "Long enough to finish a dance, if you are brave enough." Her laughter rang bright against the somber music, and as she reached for his hand purely for show, she told herself, Ethan felt a current run through his veins, something dangerously close to hope. The orchestra swelled again, and somewhere between her nervous chatter and his hesitant smiles, the loneliness between them began to fade. Neither of them knew that what started as a fake date, born out of embarrassment and impulse, would soon become the one thing that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of Ethan's penthouse. The rain from the wedding had stopped, leaving the city below glistening like it had been freshly washed. Ethan sat by the window, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He had barely slept. He kept replaying that moment when Maya had laughed beside him, the warmth of her hand on his, the way her presence had felt so unplanned yet so natural. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to him without hesitation or pity. When the night had ended, she had thanked him quietly, promised to return his handkerchief, and disappeared into the crowd. Now that handkerchief sat folded on the table beside him, a small but strange reminder that maybe something had shifted. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Clara, appeared at the doorway, holding a tablet. "Mr. Ward, the board is waiting for you in the conference room," she said. Ethan nodded. "Start without me. I will join in 5." When she left, his reflection stared back at him in the window. The same face that had once been on magazine covers, now shadowed by exhaustion and quiet resentment. His empire had survived the accident, but he had not. Down the street, Maya was getting her son, Noah, ready for school. The small apartment smelled faintly of toast and laundry soap. Noah was tying his shoelaces, humming a song from a cartoon. "Mom, why are you smiling?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, realizing she was. "Just thinking about last night, baby. I met someone interesting." Noah grinned mischievously. "Is he nice?" Maya hesitated, remembering Ethan's kind but guarded eyes. "Yes," she said finally. "He is nice, and he needed a friend more than I did." After dropping Noah off, she took the subway to the diner, where she worked double shifts. The wedding had been her one escape, a borrowed dress, a favor for her cousin who had needed extra guests to fill a table. She had not expected it to lead anywhere. But all morning, she caught herself glancing at her phone, wondering if he had thought about her too. Later that week, fate decided to play again. Maya was balancing a tray of coffee cups when the bell above the diner door chimed. She turned and froze. Ethan Ward was there, dressed in a dark coat, his wheelchair gleaming under the fluorescent light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he smiled. "You forgot to return my handkerchief." She laughed softly, flustered. "I was going to bring it to you. I did not know where to find you." "Now you do," he said, glancing around the humble diner. "May I have lunch here? Or is it reserved for important people only?" Her eyes softened. "You might be the most important person we have had all week." As she guided him to a corner booth, customers turned to look, some curious, some judgmental. Maya ignored them. She poured his coffee, noticing how he moved with practiced precision, every gesture quiet but deliberate. "So, do you always track down women who save you from awkward weddings?" she teased. Ethan's lips twitched. "Only the ones who make me forget I am supposed to be miserable." For a long time they talked about work, about Noah, about the feeling of pretending to be someone you are not just to survive the day. The conversation flowed as easily as it had at the wedding, and for the first time in years, Ethan laughed, truly laughed. When the lunch rush began, Maya had to return to work, but before she could leave, Ethan placed a business card on the counter. "I have a proposal," he said, his tone careful. "It is not what you think, but I would like to explain it over dinner. Tomorrow. Same courage as last time?" Her fingers brushed the card, her heart fluttering with both fear and curiosity. "Dinner with a billionaire? That sounds like a bad idea." "Or," Ethan said softly, "maybe it is exactly the kind of fake idea that turns out real." This face, so she met his eyes and, despite every instinct to run, found herself nodding. "All right, Mr. Ward. One dinner." As he rolled toward the door, the bell chimed again, leaving behind the faint scent of rain on his coat and the impossible thought that something extraordinary had just begun. The next evening, Maya stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from her only good dress. It was soft blue, the same color she had worn at the wedding. She had repaired a loose button and borrowed a small silver necklace from her neighbor. Her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. She had told herself it was just dinner, just a conversation. Still, the thought of meeting Ethan Ward again made her hands tremble. She checked on Noah, who was drawing at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Lewis will stay with you tonight, okay? I will not be long." Her son nodded. "Is it about work?" She smiled faintly. "Something like that." When she reached the restaurant, she hesitated at the entrance. It was one of those elegant places where soft jazz played and waiters glided silently between tables. For a moment, she considered turning around. Then she heard his voice. "You came," Ethan said from the table near the window. He looked different tonight, sharper, calmer. The city lights reflected off his dark suit, and the shadow of his wheelchair barely showed beneath the linen tablecloth. "I said I would," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "But you never said what this was about." Ethan folded his hands, studying her carefully. "I need a partner, someone to accompany me to a series of charity events and business functions over the next few weeks. It would be a temporary arrangement, strictly professional." Her brows lifted. "You want to hire me? As what, your assistant?" "Not exactly," he said. "More like my public companion. People talk, investors speculate, and I am tired of being treated like a broken man. If they see me with someone warm, confident, it changes the story." Maya blinked, stunned. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? Fake date, Fake partnership, whatever name makes you less uncomfortable, Ethan said gently. You would be compensated fairly, of course, and I will make sure Noah's needs are covered during that time. Her mind swirled. You barely know me. He smiled softly. That is exactly why you fit. You do not see me as a project or a headline. You just talk to me like a person. For a moment, she could not answer. The offer sounded ridiculous, yet something in his tone, quiet, respectful, sincere, made her believe it was not a trick. She looked down at her hands. What are the rules of this arrangement? Ethan reached into his briefcase and slid a simple document across the table. Three main ones. You can leave any time. No real obligations beyond public appearances. And most importantly, we stay honest, no pretending outside the events. Maya skimmed the paper. There was nothing deceptive about it. Just an agreement for appearances, schedules, and a modest salary. Still, her heart pounded like she was signing away more than time. Why me, Ethan? She asked quietly. He met her eyes. Because for the first time in years, when you sat beside me, I did not feel invisible. Something in her chest tightened. She thought about the bills piled on her counter, the extra shifts, and the way her son sometimes asked why she looked tired all the time. She also thought about the man in front of her, powerful but painfully human. Finally, she signed her name at the bottom of the page. All right, Mr. Ward, I will be your fake date. He extended his hand with a faint smile. Then let us begin our act. The waiter arrived with 2 plates of pasta, but neither touched their food. They talked instead about Noah's school, about Ethan's accident, about the quiet loneliness that hid behind success and survival. The conversation felt effortless, almost dangerous in how real it became. When dinner ended, Ethan wheeled to the door beside her. You should know, he said softly. I never do things halfway. If we are pretending, we might as well make it convincing. Maya looked at him, half amused, half nervous. Then I guess I should start practicing my smile. As he escorted her to the waiting car, the city lights danced on wet pavement. Both of them knew this arrangement would blur the lines between fake and real far faster than either expected. The next few days moved like a dream Maya could not quite believe was real. A sleek black car began arriving at her apartment every morning, the driver polite, patient, always addressing her as Miss Collins. She would drop Noah at school and then be driven to a world that had once felt unreachable, tailored suits, marble lobbies, and glittering rooftops. Ethan had arranged everything. He had hired a stylist to teach her the basics of posture, table etiquette, and media presence. You do not need to be someone else, the stylist said kindly as she adjusted Maya's dress for a fitting. You just need to walk like you belong there. At first, Maya had felt like a fraud. Every movement felt forced, every smile too careful. But whenever Ethan entered the room, that anxiety eased. He was patient, steady, guiding her through every step with quiet encouragement. Their first public appearance was a charity gala at the Grand Regent Hotel. The ballroom shimmered with gold light, crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen rain. Photographers crowded the entrance. Ethan waited beside the limo door, dressed in a black suit, calm as ever. Ready? He asked. Not even close, she whispered, clutching her small purse. He smiled faintly. Then I will make it easy. Just look at me, not them. As the doors opened and flashes erupted around them, Maya took a breath and placed her hand on his arm. For a moment, she forgot to be afraid. Together they moved through the crowd, her laughter genuine now, his confidence no longer forced. Inside, people whispered. Some were curious, others skeptical. But the cameras caught something unexpected. A billionaire in a wheelchair looking at a woman as if she were the only person in the room. During dinner, one of Ethan's board members leaned across the table. You must be the reason our CEO is smiling again, he said warmly. Maya blushed. I think he just likes the music. Ethan's eyes glimmered with amusement. I like the company. The evening ended with a slow waltz. Ethan could not stand, but when the orchestra began to play, Maya knelt slightly and placed his hand on her waist. They moved together, small, subtle motions, enough to suggest a dance. The crowd quieted. For a moment, the music and their unspoken rhythm filled the entire hall. When the final note faded, applause erupted. Maya smiled through the blur of lights, not realizing her hand still rested on his. Later, back in the car, the city lights rolled past the windows in streaks of gold. You did well tonight, Ethan said softly. So did you, she replied. You made it look easy. It is easier when you are beside me. The words lingered in the quiet air. She looked out the window, pretending not to notice how her chest tightened. In the weeks that followed, the act became routine galas, business dinners, press events. Yet every outing felt less like performance and more like partnership. Ethan began to open up, sharing small pieces of his life before the accident. His love for hiking, the night sky from his old cabin, the fear that he would never walk again. Maya listened, sometimes teasing, sometimes silent, but always honest. And when she laughed, Ethan found himself memorizing the sound. One afternoon, as they left an investor luncheon, a light drizzle fell. Ethan looked up at the gray sky and said, "You know, it almost feels normal again." Maya smiled. "Maybe because it is." He turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Do you ever forget we are pretending?" Her breath caught. "Sometimes." Neither spoke after that. The rain fell quietly on the car roof, their reflections mingling in the window glass, two people caught between duty and something dangerously close to love. Neither of them noticed how thin the line between fake and real had already become. 2 months later, the arrangement that had begun as a quiet business deal had turned into something far more complicated. Maya had become a familiar presence in Ethan's world. His staff no longer looked surprised when she walked through the lobby, and even the security guards smiled when she passed. She fit there now, though she still refused to believe it. One evening, after a long board meeting, Ethan invited her to his penthouse for dinner. The view stretched across the skyline, the lights of the city blinking like fallen stars. Soft music played in the background. A chef had prepared the meal, but Ethan had insisted on setting the table himself. Maya smiled as she entered. "You did all this just to impress me?" Ethan gave a half smile. "It seemed only fair. You have been carrying me through crowded rooms for weeks. I thought I would at least serve you a proper dinner." She laughed, taking her seat. But as they ate, the mood shifted. There was no audience tonight, no pretense, only silence between soft notes of piano. "You have changed," she said after a while. "You smile more." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe because I stopped feeling like half a person." Maya lowered her eyes, her voice quiet. "And what happens when the contract ends?" The question hung in the air. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I suppose that depends on whether we both still want to pretend." Her heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to tell him that the pretending had stopped a long time ago. But before she could, his phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. "It is from the board," he said slowly. "They have concerns about us." "About us?" she repeated. "Some investors think this arrangement damages my credibility. They believe you are a distraction." Maya's stomach dropped. "I never wanted to cause trouble." "You did not," he said quickly. "But they want to see you at the next shareholders meeting. They are calling it an evaluation." An uneasy silence followed. Maya forced a smile. "Then I guess I will have to prove them wrong." The meeting took place 2 days later in a vast conference room lined with glass. Maya sat beside Ethan, feeling every eye in the room turn toward her. Questions came sharp and fast about her background, her intentions, even her relationship with the company. She answered calmly, with dignity. When one executive sneered, "So, what makes you qualified to represent Mr. Ward's image?" She replied, "Because I am not pretending to be perfect. I am just real, and sometimes that is enough." The room went silent. Ethan's gaze softened with pride. After the meeting, they rode the elevator down together. "You handled that better than I did," he said quietly. "I handled it for both of us," she answered with a small smile. When the doors opened, he reached for her hand. "Maya, this started as a contract, but I cannot keep calling it that anymore." She froze. "Ethan," before she could finish, his phone buzzed again. Clara's voice came through from the speaker. "Sir, your ex-fiancée is here. She says it is urgent." Maya stepped back instantly, her breath catching. Ethan's face tensed. "I did not know she was coming." "It is all right," Maya said, forcing a steady tone. "You should talk to her." He tried to stop her, but she was already walking away. Outside, the wind swept across the marble steps, carrying the faint echo of her heels. Back in his office, Ethan watched from the window as her figure disappeared into the street below. For the first time in years, the world felt cold again. He had thought he could control this, set the terms, define the limits, but love had rewritten every rule. And as he sat there, the contract still lying unsigned on his desk, Ethan Ward finally understood that what he had lost tonight was not a business arrangement. It was the only real thing he had left. The next few days passed in silence. Ethan buried himself in meetings, but his thoughts never strayed far from the image of Maya walking away that night. Her laughter still echoed faintly in the corners of his mind, a sound he had not realized he depended on until it was gone. He had told himself it was better this way. She would return to her life, and he would return to his empire. The arrangement had served its purpose, but every time he looked across the long conference table or came home to his empty penthouse, the lie unraveled a little more. Meanwhile, Maya tried to do the same. She worked longer shifts at the diner, forcing herself to focus on tips and trays instead of headlines that now appeared on her phone. Billionaire Ethan Ward, seen with mystery woman. The photos from the gala still circulated online, her in the blue dress, her hand resting on his arm, his gaze fixed only on her. She had thought she could handle the attention. She had not expected the loneliness that followed. One rainy evening, she returned home exhausted. Noah ran up to her, waving a folded newspaper. "Mom, is that your friend?" he asked, pointing to a small picture of Ethan beside an article about an upcoming charity auction. Maya smiled faintly. "Yes, baby. That is him. It minus basaglaf some joining. You miss him," Noah said simply. She paused, then whispered, "Yes, I do." Across the city, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the same article. The auction was scheduled for Friday, a grand event to fund prosthetics research. He had organized it months ago, but now the thought of attending without her felt unbearable. Finally, he made a decision. He reached for his phone and dialed her number. It rang twice before her voice answered, soft and cautious. "Ethan? Maya?" he said quietly. "I know I have no right to ask, but will you come to the charity event this Friday? One last time. No cameras, no pretending. Just you and me." Just answer. She hesitated, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. "Why?" "Because I owe you a real goodbye," he said. "And maybe a real beginning." When Friday arrived, the ballroom was alive with chatter and candlelight. Ethan sat near the stage, greeting donors, his composure steady, though his heart raced. Then, just as the lights dimmed, he saw her. Maya stood in the doorway, wearing the same soft blue dress, her hair gathered loosely behind her shoulders. She looked nervous, but when their eyes met, she smiled the same honest, imperfect smile that had changed everything. He wheeled forward to meet her halfway. "You came." "I almost did not," she admitted. "But Noah said heroes should always finish what they start." Ethan chuckled softly. "Your son is wiser than I am." The host called his name for the opening speech, but Ethan did not move toward the podium. Instead, he took Maya's hand. "Stay with me," he said. They rolled onto the small stage together. The crowd watched, puzzled, as Ethan adjusted the microphone. "Tonight's event is about rebuilding lives," he began, his voice steady. "But I realized something recently. Money can build structures, but only love can rebuild people. And I would not have learned that without her." He turned toward Maya, his hand tightening around hers. "This woman reminded me what it means to live. The contract we signed was supposed to be fake. The mistake was mine. It became the most real thing in my life." A soft murmur spread through the room. Maya's eyes glistened, her voice trembling. "Ethan, you do not have to do this in front of everyone." "Yes, I do," he said, "because for once I want the whole world to see that I am not ashamed to love you." The applause began slowly, then grew louder, until it filled the entire hall. Maya's tears fell freely now, but her smile never faded. For the first time in years, Ethan Ward did not feel confined by the chair beneath him. He felt free because the woman who had once pretended to love him now truly did. And this time, there was no contract between them, only a promise. The applause that night followed them long after they left the ballroom. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Ethan did not stop to answer. He only held Maya's hand tightly as they made their way through the corridor and into the waiting car. The door closed, muting the chaos outside. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city lights flickered across their faces, turning silence into something fragile and beautiful. Finally, Maya exhaled. "You really had to say all of that in front of everyone?" Ethan looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If I had said it privately, you might not have believed me." She shook her head, half laughing, half crying. "You are unbelievable." Maybe, he said softly. But everything I said was true. They drove in silence again, but this time it was peaceful. When the car stopped outside her apartment, Ethan turned toward her. Can I walk you to the door? She hesitated, glancing at his wheelchair, then smiled. You mean roll me to the door? He chuckled. Exactly. Under the soft drizzle, they moved slowly toward the entrance. The streetlights painted their shadows on the wet pavement. When they reached the door, Ethan stopped. Maya, I do not want this to end with a speech and applause. I want a real life with you and Noah, if you will have me. Her breath caught. Ethan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. No contracts this time. Just a question. Inside the box was not a diamond ring, but a simple silver band engraved with one line. Real over pretend. Tears filled her eyes. You kept your promise, she whispered. I learned from you, he said quietly. You taught me that love is not about appearances. It is about showing up when it matters. She took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes, Ethan, I will. The rain fell harder then, washing over them as if the world itself wanted to start fresh. He reached for her hand, and in that moment the distance between his world and hers disappeared. Weeks later, their story became the kind people whispered about the billionaire who fell for the single mother who had nothing to offer but honesty. The tabloids called it a miracle. Maya called it life. Ethan began visiting the diner where she still worked, insisting on paying for every cup of coffee even though she teased him for it. Noah would sit across from him, asking questions about his wheelchair, his company, and whether superheroes could be engineers. Ethan always answered with patience and laughter. One afternoon, Maya looked at them and felt a warmth she had never known. This was not the world of gala lights or contracts. This was home. Later that summer, Ethan invited her and Noah to his cabin by the lake, a place he had not visited since before the accident. The air smelled of pine and water, and the horizon stretched endlessly ahead. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold, Ethan wheeled onto the dock, watching Maya and Noah skip stones. This is the first time I have come back here since everything happened, he said quietly. Maya turned, smiling. Does it feel different? He nodded. It feels like the world finally gave me a second chance. She walked toward him, kneeling beside his chair. It was not the world, Ethan. You gave it to yourself. Is the same. He looked at her, emotion thick in his voice. No, Maya, you gave it to me. As the last light faded behind the trees, Noah ran toward them, laughing. Ethan reached out, pulling him close. For the first time, the three of them stood together as a family. There were no more reporters, no contracts, no pretending. Only truth, only love, and the quiet sound of water against the dock, a reminder that even the loneliest hearts can find their way home again. Autumn came early that year, turning the trees around the lake into waves of gold and crimson. For Ethan, every morning felt like a new beginning. The cabin that had once been a place of silence now echoed with the sound of laughter, Noah's footsteps, and the soft hum of Maya humming while she made breakfast. It had been 6 months since that night at the charity gala, and Ethan's life had changed in ways he had never imagined. He still ran his company, but his days no longer revolved around meetings and deadlines. He spent his mornings by the water, helping Noah build wooden boats, and his evenings beside Maya, watching the sun sink into the horizon. One cool evening, as the fireplace crackled softly, Maya sat beside him on the couch, sorting through old photographs she had found in a drawer. You never told me how you ended up here before the accident, she said, holding up a faded picture of a younger Ethan standing on the same dock, smiling and free. He stared at the photo for a long moment. I used to come here to remind myself that money did not define me. I built everything so fast that I forgot what mattered. The accident, it forced me to stop. Maya traced her finger over the edge of the picture. Maybe you just needed to fall still long enough to see the people who would catch you. Ethan smiled at her, his voice low. That was you, Maya. You and Noah. You gave me something I could never buy, peace. She looked at him, her eyes bright with quiet emotion. Then promise me one thing. No matter what happens, do not go back to hiding behind the company or the chair. Live the life you were meant to live. He reached for her hand. I already am. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the smell of rain and wood smoke. Noah ran into the room, clutching a piece of paper. Mom, Ethan, look! He held up a drawing of the three of them, Ethan, in his wheelchair, Maya beside him, and Noah holding both their hands. Above the picture, in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "My family." Maya felt tears sting her eyes. Ethan took the paper gently, his voice soft. "You are quite the artist, Noah." Noah grinned. "It is going to be part of my school project. The theme is real heroes." Ethan's throat tightened. "And who is the hero in this picture?" Noah looked up at him. "You both are, because you did not give up." Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Maya and Ethan sat outside on the porch. The moon reflected on the lake, the same way it had the night they met. "I used to think my life ended the day of that accident," Ethan said quietly. "Now I know it just began again the night you asked me to fake a date." Maya leaned against him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that was never fake. Maybe that was fate." He turned to her, his eyes warm. "Then I guess fate has good taste. Man rain. Wilde arts." She laughed softly, the sound melting into the night air. As the wind carried the scent of pine and the gentle sound of rippling water, Ethan reached into his pocket and took out the simple silver band she had once accepted. He placed it in her hand again. "This ring was meant to remind us what is real," he said. "But I think we both know now. Everything that matters is already here." Maya closed her fingers around the ring and kissed his forehead. "And we are not pretending anymore." In the quiet that followed, the fire from inside flickered through the cabin windows, painting them in gold. For Ethan Ward, the billionaire who once sat alone at a wedding, the story had come full circle. He was no longer a man defined by loss or wealth. He was a husband, a father, and finally, a whole human being. And as the night deepened, the sound of laughter drifted softly through the open door, proof that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a single, unexpected word: pretend. Spring returned quietly, painting the lake in soft shades of green. The cabin, once lonely and forgotten, was alive again, filled with sunlight, laughter, and the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Ethan had learned to use a new wheelchair that allowed him to move more freely. He often wheeled himself down the narrow wooden path to the dock, where Maya and Noah waited with fishing poles and a cooler full of sandwiches. That morning, the air was warm and clean, birds darted between the trees, and the water shimmered like glass. Maya handed Ethan a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the bench. "You know," she said, smiling, "if someone told me a year ago that I would be living in a billionaire's lake house, I would have laughed." Ethan took her hand. "If someone told me a year ago that a single mother and her little boy would be my whole world, I would not have believed it either." She squeezed his fingers. "I still cannot believe how far we have come. That made a back now and you no step to do into grain. The reckoninsterals." He glanced at the ring on her finger, the simple silver band engraved with real over pretend. "You made me remember what real actually feels like," he said. Noah ran toward them, waving excitedly. "Mom, Ethan, look what I caught." He held up a small fish wriggling on the line, his grin wide enough to light up the morning. Maya clapped, and Ethan laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. When the laughter faded, Ethan looked out across the lake. "You know," he said softly, "for the longest time, I thought my life was over when I lost my ability to walk. I measured my worth by the things I could not do. But now, every time I see Noah smile or hear you laugh, I realize I have everything I ever needed." Maya leaned against his shoulder. "You never lost anything that mattered, Ethan. You just had to find where your real life began." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And it began the night you walked up to me at that wedding and said, 'Let's fake a date.'" She laughed. "That was the worst line I have ever used. And the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft ripples against the dock. The world felt still, peaceful, and whole. Later that day, their small family gathered around a wooden table for dinner. Noah was chattering about his school project while Ethan cut the bread, his movements calm and steady. Maya watched them both, her heart full. As the sun dipped low, she whispered, "Do you ever think about what people would say if they saw us now?" Ethan smiled. "Let them talk. The world will always have something to say about love that does not fit their idea of perfect. But what we have is ours. That is what makes it beautiful." He reached across the table and took her hand. "From the moment you asked me to pretend, my heart decided it would never stop believing in you." Her eyes glistened. "And I never stopped believing in you," Ban. It is cries Munstan's fanal die. The Juection. The wind carried their laughter through the open window, blending with the sounds of the lake. Somewhere in that quiet, Ethan realized the story that had begun with loneliness and a lie had become the truest thing he had ever known. Years later, people would still whisper about the billionaire who fell in love with the single mother. But to Ethan and Maya, it was never about money, power, or status. It was about two broken hearts choosing to heal together, about kindness, courage, and a love that refused to stay fake. As the last light of the day faded into the water, Ethan looked at his wife and said softly, This, this is forever. This is forever, Maya smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. No more pretending, she whispered. Only love. And with that, the house by the lake glowed under the stars, filled with the quiet joy of a family who had finally found home, not in wealth, but in each other.